Yes?
My wife is pregnant and we need a place to stay.
I'm sorry, we have no room.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. So glad you could join us. I hope everyone had a pleasant holiday, regardless of who you were with or what you ate. That was the time to just give thanks, especially for the melting snow. It just came a little too early this year. Maybe. I don't know. For some of us, maybe you were ready for it. I was not. Well, welcome to today's presentation. My name is Mark Mann. I'm the Director of Programs and Institutes here at the Catholic Information Center. The ministry of the center is to create spaces for encounter, dialogue, and community at the intersection of faith and life. The hope of our witness is that all people will be able to discover the good news of God's reign with joy. We're a ministry of the Paulist Fathers in collaboration with the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I'm very happy to welcome today Father Stephen Dudek as our presenter for this 55+ series, Making Room in the Inn, Making Room in Our Hearts. So we'll be exploring the lessons that the tradition, especially Mexican tradition of Las Posadas has for us today. Father Stephen Dudek is a priest of the Diocese of Grand Rapids and has served as the Diocesan Director of Missions since 2009. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from St. Thomas Seminary in Denver and a Licentiate Degree in Theology from the Jesuit-run Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. While in Ghana, he studied at the Tamale Institute of Cross-Cultural Studies, and I know he'll have stories for you of all these places as we go today. In 2002, he was awarded a Doctor of Ministry from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. And for many years, he has coordinated pilgrimages of reverse mission among the indigenous communities of the Archdiocese of Oaxaca, Mexico. His local parish ministry has been here in Grand Rapids, Muskegon, Holland, Wyoming, among English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, and Vietnamese-speaking communities, and has heightened his awareness of the gifts and challenges of what it means to serve in culturally diverse parishes, much like our own cathedral here. Please help me welcome Father Stephen Dudek.
Good morning. It's a joy to be with you on this beautiful sunny December day. It's hard to imagine we're already at the 1st of December, but we are. I'd like to just begin with a brief prayer. It can be found on your prayer cards. And just invite you to pray this prayer along with me. It comes to us from the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving Father, in your infinite compassion, we seek your divine protection for refugee children who are often alone and afraid. Provide solace to those who have been witnesses to violence and destruction, who have lost parents, family, friends, home, and all they cherish due to war or persecution. Comfort them in their sorrow and bring help in their time of need. Show mercy to unaccompanied migrant children too, Lord. Reunite them with their families and loved ones. Guide those children who are strangers in a foreign land to a place of peace and safety. Comfort them in their sorrow and bring help in their time of need. Show us how we might reach out to these precious and vulnerable children. Open our hearts to migrant and refugee children in need, so that we may see in them your own migrant son. Give us courage to stand up in their defense against those who would do them harm. For this we pray through our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Holy Spirit. Amen. I was delighted when Mark asked me to do a presentation focusing on Posadas, the Mexican or Latino tradition that so goes to the heart of the Christmas message, the Christmas story. And so today what I'd like to do is share a little bit about that tradition. We're going to see a couple of video clips taken from, one of them was taken from a parish in New Mexico, which has a long-standing tradition and history of continuing this. I, for one, saw this experience and took part in this experience many, many times. Here in my parishes, I've been pastor in Muskegon. I was pastor in Holland at St. Francis de Sales for 10 years as pastor, 4 years as an associate, and then most recently 18 years at Holy Name of Jesus Parish and at the San Juan Diego Academy. And so I've seen these experiences and taken part in them, and they're very rich experiences. They're very, they're not high pressure. You just sing and eat and talk and reflect. And it's just a wonderful way of sharing Christmas. Generally, they happen traditionally 9 nights before Christmas. And at each one, there's a little bit of a gathering, or how we'd say in Spanish, a convivencia, to live with one another, to celebrate one another's presence. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. It's a tradition that not only exists in Mexico, or as here in the United States, of people of Mexican background, but some other countries in Latin America also practice this tradition. And there's also other traditions that are similar but different. In Colombia and South America, they have the Christmas novena. And in many parts of Latin America, they have what are called pastorelas, or Christmas plays. Sometimes they almost look like the moral, ethical plays that they showed in the Middle Ages to teach lessons. And so there's a lot of different traditions that surround Christmas. Like so many things in the Spanish-speaking world, every country is very different, and the traditions of one may or may not be present, or even the language of one may or may not be suitable in another. So it was a joy as a pastor to be able to preach in Spanish, but at the same time, it has certain dangers. Because sometimes you say a word that's perfectly fine in one Spanish-speaking country, and it is not okay in the next Spanish-speaking country. And I remember talking about using the theme of Posadas in one of my early homilies back when there was a chapel next to the cathedral here, and there was a Spanish Mass. Some of you might remember back when Father Ted was there and Sister Lucia. And I can remember preaching this really wonderful reflection on Posadas and the Christmas message. And this Puerto Rican guy came up to me all upset. Why are you talking that way? Well, posada in Mexican Spanish means like a place for lodging, where they take you in at the inn. Well, in Puerto Rican Spanish, according to this individual, means shacking up. So it's one of those words you do have to be a little bit careful with, but I think most people understand the Mexican context of it. But more than once I put my foot into my mouth, and if we had a long time, I could tell you some of those stories over the years where I said things that didn't come out quite the way that I had intended. So let's take a look a little bit at this experience, but before we do so, you know, it really centers around pregnancy. Now, that's not something I know a lot about. Many of you do. So tell me, at a time of pregnancy, is pregnancy a time of joyful expectation and or rejection and fear for you or for others? What do you think? What is it? Both? Why both? What have been your experiences? What have you seen? What would make it both? Go ahead, Leslie.
Joyful, as you know, you're expecting a baby, but at the same time, you're kind of fearful, going, "Am I going to be a good parent?" And hopefully, you know, what if I drop the baby, or you know, I can't get the baby to stop crying. So,
especially that first one, right?
The first one, especially, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My daughter just went through, I have a beautiful 8-month-old grandson. But prior to that pregnancy, she had 2 miscarriages in a row before she became pregnant again. So she had a lot of fear during that pregnancy that it would happen again. And I don't think until she was quite far into the pregnancy that she was able to experience the joyful expectation.
Okay.
I live in a neighborhood very Latino. And I remember the woman who came to me. She was 5 months pregnant. She had 6 children. Her husband had raped her. And she didn't know how in the world she could cope. The husband had left, by the way. How she was going to cope.
It's the thought of putting bread on the table for one more. Yeah. Other thoughts?
What's the rejection part of it? I understand the fear and rejection.
Well, I think the question for some might be, especially for immigrants, will they be accepted? Will they be welcomed? If they're going to have a child in another place, what will that experience be like for their child? If a person is a person of color, what does that imply? Rejection at the end. You know, the door was closed. And what does that do to you when you repeatedly have the door closed and say, no, you're not welcome, or we don't want you here? Or, you know, you can use all sorts of terms that you may have heard or read in the media for immigrants or refugees. So the question goes to, you know, what sort of an impact does that have on you as a person? But I think, you know, we need to look at pregnancy as hopefully a time of joy, a time of expectation, but also recognize that for many, it can be an experience of rejection or fear. And maybe those experiences are mixed together. I think of some of the Venezuelan refugees right now who have for years been streaming out of Venezuela as a result of all kinds of political issues there, and have taken up refuge primarily in Colombia. Colombia has been one of the countries with the most welcoming spirit in the world right now when it comes to refugees. Millions and millions of Venezuelans have been provided with a safe place in Colombia to live, and also with authorization to work. Now, that has had huge implications for Colombians themselves, but I think the Colombian nation and the Colombian church needs to be recognized for that. And many of those refugees have literally walked across South America. I've had the opportunity in the missions office to work with people in missions offices in South America, and to hear the stories of people who work in Peru or Chile, and how refugees from Venezuela have literally walked. And if you've ever seen the size of the South American continent, it is, you know, puts North America to shame size-wise. You know, to think of that as that experience, and the number of children who are born along the way. You know, these children who continue to be born into that experience as migrants and refugees. So let's, this year, we ask ourselves the question, is there room at the end for the birth of a child? Whether that's the physical inn, is that the inn of our hearts? I think we can keep that in the broadest of senses. So let's take a look at what a posada looks like. But before we do that, I'm going to ask that you pay particularly attention to the words of the songs. They'll be translated here, because I think they've got a real power and a real depth to them. The same songs are usually sung in every posada. Latinos love tradition, and you can't repeat the same thing too many times. I mean, we live in a culture where we love to do things different all the time, or we got to shake it. That's not the world, Latino world. The world in Latin America is very much rooted in traditions, in ritual, and repeating. And so these songs have been passed on for generations to generation. Musically, they're not the most sophisticated, and sometimes the musicians are not always highly on key. I mean, but they come from the heart. And so the words of the songs are particularly important. Generally, now there's different ways of doing it. This one is going to show us arriving at the door, a family saying no, and then eventually letting them in. Generally, they go to different houses or different doors, with the last one letting you in. And that's where you sing a different song and you celebrate with food and beverage, and usually a piñata. And the piñata also has symbolism that goes way, way back. Now, these aren't recent traditions or customs. Most of these were brought from Spain or had their root in Spain, or if not in Spain, they developed in Latin America, probably in the 15, 16, and 1700s. So we're going back a way. Generally, around the time of Trent. And so, interestingly enough, much of Latin America was evangelized before the Council of Trent. And so the church there might look a little different than other places in the world where they had that Trent experience. So let's take a look at this one little community in Ojo Caliente, New Mexico, and see how they celebrate it. It depends. It depends. Some people will maybe participate one of the 9 nights. Some people, like the musicians, might be hooked into it for 9 nights. Sometimes they walk from house to house to house. Now, the reality is all of this has to be adapted to something we call in this part of the country winter. Okay? Even the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe has to be adapted to winter because, so many of these customs come from warm climates. In Mexico, this time of the year, it's delightful. I mean, you maybe have a light jacket on or something, but you're served a cup of hot chocolate or something at night, and it's nice to be outside. But here we've got to adapt because of snow conditions. But oftentimes people will just participate in a night or a couple of nights of the experience.
Christmas caroling.
It's a little bit like Christmas. It's got a little something to do with that. Yeah. Now, they do have their own tradition of caroling, though, in Latin America and in Mexico, and they have their own Christmas carols, villancicos. But they're different than our European carol tradition, which tends to come from the Welsh tradition, the English tradition, Scandinavian, and those countries, German, Polish. Latin American Christmas carols have a whole different feel, but they've got them, and they're quite beautiful. Yeah.
When you said that the tradition is dwindling and they're trying to keep it vibrant, how is that tradition in the community today?
I think it's like anything, the younger generations, sometimes they don't see it as important or whatever. But there's ways of keeping it alive, and one of them is the piñata and having fun. And notice the kids were speaking in English and the parents were doing songs in Spanish. That's pretty much how it's usually done. I know our kids at San Juan Diego Academy, they prefer to talk English, but at the same time, we don't want them to lose that ability to be bilingual, which is we live in a funny society because we tell people and immigrants to learn English and lose their old language. And then when they get into college, they got to pay to learn it again. This makes no sense. We're the only country in the world that does that. And part of that is because of our huge borders. In Europe, everybody grows up learning 3 languages, and it's just the way it is. But in this country, we just haven't quite figured that out yet. So one of the characteristics I think of Posadas and Hispanic ministry in general is it's very family oriented. You really don't you always do it in the context of family, and kids are a part of it. It's intergenerational, quite different from the approach we take in our European American cultures. But what I'd like to do now is just talk about that experience of welcoming the stranger and where we're at in the United States and how important it is for us as a nation, but particularly as a Catholic Church. Because I think there's real important lessons for us, and they're very biblical, they're very scriptural, and so I'd like to just talk about that experience of welcoming the stranger. And I'd like to begin by just sharing the words of a chief in Ghana who spoke to me when he discovered I was Catholic. I spent some time in Ghana among the Dagbani people. I was working on my degree at Catholic Theological Union. I'd worked in Hispanic ministry for many years. So I was doing a degree in intercultural ministry and mission. And so they said at the school that your Hispanic ministry is a second culture to you. So you've got a choice. We want you to work in some other culture. And I said, well, what are my options? And they said, well, there's a great institute for intercultural learning in Africa. How about spending 4 months there? So I said, fine. So I jumped at the opportunity, and I was living in a little hut like that, grass hut made out of adobe. And I spent a few months trying to learn a language called Dagbani. And I was the only non-African person in that village. And little by little, I was learning this language. To be very honest with you, the only thing I remember after many years now is Biela Danam Wobugu, which means little by little, the elephant grows. Oh, that doesn't even get you to a bathroom or a Coca-Cola. So I wouldn't get very far if I went back there today. But the chief in the village was an interesting individual. And he said to me, I admire Catholics for 2 reasons. Now, remember, the village was probably 40% Muslim, 30 or 40% traditional believers, tribal practices, and only about 20% Catholic and Christian. He said, I admire you Christians and Catholics for 2 reasons. One, if you want to speak to your God, all you got to do is pray. You just talk to your God. We got to slaughter a chicken or something like this, offering and all this. He said, you just talk to your God. Do you know how radical that is? It never dawned on me until somebody said that to me. I thought, I've been Catholic all my life. I never even think of these things, but it put it in new perspective. The other thing he said was, I admire Christians because they love not only their own tribe, but all the tribes. Now, one of the shadows of Africa is tribalism. And it continues to this day to be something that can result in all sorts of violence and bloodshed and the like. I was living with the Ngomba people, and the Konkombas were just down the road. And I was literally told time and time again, if somebody who was a Konkomba came into that village, they would be killed. I mean, these were people I knew and I cared about, and I loved, and talking with them, it was just, that's the way it is. How do you know you're from a different tribe? They have tribal markings. They have, when a child is born and brought into the world, they have a ceremony called an outdooring. And before they see sunlight for the first time, it's usually 9 days or so while they're in the little hut where the mother was, they cut with a type of knife into the child's cheek. And there's certain lines or circle or whatever that will indicate both the tribe and the clan. So, you wonder how people know that somebody's from a different tribe. Well, it's apparent. I mean, it's on your face. So, but he said to me, you love not only your own tribe, but all the tribes. Now, we as Catholics, we don't use the word tribe. Our United States Catholic Conference of Bishops talks about the 6 Catholic families here in the United States. And so here in our work as Catholics in the US, the bishops have identified ministry among 6 families. The first I'd like to talk about is the African American family, or the African family. And there's about 3 million African and African American Catholics in the United States. Here at the Cathedral of St. Andrew, you have a monthly Mass for the African diaspora or immigrant refugee community. And it's a wonderful experience. If you ever get an opportunity to attend, go. Don't plan on getting over in an hour. Okay, it's going to take a little longer than an hour. I remember my first experience of a Mass in Africa. I think it took 3 hours. I don't think it takes quite that long here. And I also remember dancing with my offering to the front of the church, because you don't just drop your envelope in a basket. No, no, no. Everybody dances. And I remember very clearly, you danced according to the day of the week you were born on. So if you were a Sunday baby, the Sunday babies went up. If you were born on a Monday, the Mondays went up. If you were born on a Tuesday, well, I picked Friday because I thought it would give me more chance to see what they were doing. I didn't know when I was born, what day of the week. There they know. That's something very important in African cultures, what day of the week you were born on. So you can imagine my 6'2" frame dancing up the aisle with everybody else who were born on Fridays. There are 16 African American bishops here in the United States. Cardinal Wilton Gregory in Washington, D.C., who was previously in Atlanta, prior to that, Belleville, Illinois, prior to that, a priest of Chicago. Cardinal Gregory was a convert to Catholicism and a product of our Catholic schools. And, we see the impact that Catholic school education can make on young people like Cardinal Gregory. There are other Catholic African bishops across the country as well, but approximately 16 on my last count. We also have the Asian and Pacific Islander family. That includes 53 different cultures or countries. The largest Catholic group of Asians and Pacific Islanders are people from India, primarily from the south of India. Most Catholics live in a region called Kerala. It's in the deep south. It's very different from the north. The north is much more Hindu and Muslim. The south has got a fairly significant Christian population and a significant Catholic population, especially in Kerala. Also, there are Chinese Catholics in the United States, a large Vietnamese Catholic population in the US, and particularly in our diocese and much of the Midwest, as well as the Gulf Coast in California. Why did they settle in Grand Rapids? Why in West Michigan? Well, at the time of the fall of Saigon, President Ford was in the White House. He had all sorts of connections in West Michigan to the Catholic and Lutheran churches, Reformed churches. So we sponsored large numbers of Vietnamese refugees at the time. And to this day, they continue to be an active and vital part of our Catholic Church. Our Lady of Lavang in Wyoming, Porter. Another wonderful experience. Some Sunday, I don't drop your envelope here, but go to, I don't get trouble with the pastor, go to Our Lady of Lavang and experience Mass there. You'll find it very, very enjoyable. They chant most of the Mass. It's sung. The women come with their elegant dresses. If you can attend the Feast of the Vietnamese Martyrs or Tet, their Tet celebration, the Lunar New Year, it's a wonderful experience. I had a number of Vietnamese in my parish at Holy Name, and I always loved right after New Year's. You're never quite sure of the date. You have to kind of look it up on the calendar. But I had one little lady. I would give her the body of Christ and that amen. And then she'd give me a little red envelope with a dollar bill in it, because the tradition is to give something to others, and that brings good luck. And it's always in a red little envelope. But I just kind of always thought, this is different. But those are traditions among the Vietnamese community. We also have a significant Korean Catholic community in the United States and Filipino. The Filipino Catholic community is quite large. Of course, they speak many different languages. The largest is Tagalog, but on different islands, they can speak Cebu, they can speak with Mindanao, different places, different languages. Now, Jesus himself was Asian. We never stop and think about it, but Jesus belonged to that family. The Middle East is an Asian culture. And he has many of the values and traditions that are associated with Asian cultures, particularly being very sociocentric. Our culture here in European American culture in the United States, the dominant culture is very individualistic. You know, Asia is not individualistic, it's sociocentric. What's important is the group, what's important is the family, not the individual. Two types of cultures in general in the world. Africa tends to be very sociocentric. Asia tends to be very sociocentric. Europe, Australia, we tend to be much more individualistic. The next culture is the European American family. That's the family I belong to, and I'm assuming many of you belong to. In my case, I am of Polish and Lithuanian background. My dad came from St. Isidore's parish. My mother from St. Peter and Paul's. I was baptized in the Lithuanian American parish that my grandfather helped build at St. Peter and Paul's. What families or cultures do you represent? Shut them out. German, Irish,
German,
Polish, German. Heinz, okay. Yeah. All right. The next culture is the Hispanic or family is the Hispanic or Latino family. There are 22 different Spanish-speaking countries, 22. Sometimes we have a tendency to think like, you know, it's all like they do things in Mexico or what we know of a Latin American culture experience. Latin America is incredibly diverse. And you're not going to find tacos in Argentina. You're not going to find tacos in Colombia. You're not going to eat chile and salsa in Colombia or in Cuba. I mean, the differences between the Afro-Caribbean cultures and the Southern Cone cultures of South America, like Chile and Argentina and Uruguay, that are very European and very influenced by Italy. I mean, you eat as much pasta in Argentina as you might in Italy. And there's even in Uruguay and in Argentina, there's a day of the month where a restaurant in town serves no cheese. No cheese, how do we say that? The potato little dumpling things. Gnocchi. My Italian's pretty bad. There's a day of a month where every restaurant has those. Very Italian, very European looking. And then there are other countries like the highlands of Peru and Ecuador and Bolivia. They're very indigenous traditions, you know, pre-Columbian in their cultures. So extreme differences within Latin America, even how the language is spoken, but certainly the foods, the traditions, the cultures. So when we talk about Latinos here in this country, there's a lot of diversity among them. And here in the cathedral and Greater Grand Rapids, we're seeing an influx of people from many different Latin American cultures now, not just Mexico. In fact, I think the immigration from Mexico has fallen off significantly in the last probably 5 to 10 years. And much larger immigration right now from Guatemala, especially among the indigenous people. In our diocese, St. Joseph the Worker Parish is probably more than half Guatemalan now. And mainly they speak Mam, Cajobal, and Quiche, which are 3 pre-Columbian languages. I mean, have nothing to do with Spanish whatsoever. And those are first language. Spanish is a second language for them. And then the folks learn English here. So it's like, you know, these folks, you know, have some linguistic abilities. Many of them take the bottom rung of jobs that, you know, the Mexicans have progressed into a level where they're taking, getting better jobs. And many of the new immigrants, particularly the indigenous, are taking those entry-level jobs, working in meat plants, working as migrant farm workers, picking blueberries, picking apples. Right now, the blueberry farms, mainly indigenous people from either Chiapas in Mexico or Central America who are working on those jobs when you visit them in the summers. 17% of the US population is Hispanic or of Latino background. That means 55 million people in the US of A. And the United States is the second largest Latino country in the world after Mexico. So the US has more Latinos in it than Argentina or Spain or any other Latin American country with the exception of Mexico. So it's a significant population. Now, we also have to remember a lot of these people didn't cross a border. The border crossed where they were living. The whole Southwest was part of Mexico a lot longer than has been part of the United States. We talk about Arizona, parts of California, New Mexico, Texas. That's when you look at history, that's a fairly recent phenomena when you look at the history of the Americas. The Native American family is the next family. It's the first family to inhabit the lands we know as the Americas. And in our area, it's primarily people who affiliate as Potawatomi, Odawa, and Chippewa. Those are the three largest groups. And in many of our parishes, we have Native Americans worshiping alongside us, and we don't know it. I remember a few years ago, it was time for First Communions at Parish at Holy Name. And we're talking about, kids and what they were going to wear for First Communion and this and that. And a mother came up to me and she says, we have a different tradition in my family. I know she was Native American. She says, but we don't wear a white dress for First Holy Communion. Would it be all right if my daughter or granddaughter would wear a dress like we do in our culture? I said, well, tell me about it. She says, well, it's buckskin and it's embroidered with little beads. Well, she wore that dress to mass with the other little girl. Everybody wanted one like her. It was gorgeous. It was deerskin and it was soft and just this beautiful tone to it, and it had this beautiful bead embroidery, and that was her First Communion dress. Very appropriate. But up until that point, I did not know that Grandma was Native American. She grew up on the Lakota Sioux Reservation of South Dakota. She went back and forth. In fact, a few years later, she worked as a nurse out there for a while, and then came back to work for the government at the veterans facility. So these people are, our brothers and sisters, and sometimes we don't even know that. There are 500 recognized tribes of Native Americans in the United States. Significant cultural diversity even within the indigenous communities. And then there's a final family, a sixth family that our bishops call the migrants, refugees, and people on the move. We try to find ways to serve people pastorally. And so the bishops, to meet some of those needs, have ministries to seafarers, to carnival and circus workers, and other people on the move that are transient. I don't know if you knew that, but the Bishops' Conference has people who work with circus and carnival workers and seafarers. There's a ministry of people when these ships come into port that pastoral people will work among them. Many of them are Filipino, and so many of these seafarers, and so they have offer opportunities for mass or hearing confessions or helping people with problems. I mean, it's a lonely life sometimes, and so to work with people. So that's kind of the way it's set up. Now the reality is, though, that it's not that simple. There's not exactly 6 families. More and more people are intermarrying. Now, my mother, a Lithuanian, married my father, a Pole, and that was considered a mixed marriage back in their day and age. Well, now more and more we're seeing Latinos marrying African Americans and Asians marrying Latinos and European Americans marrying Latinos. And so there's this largest group that's growing is people of mixed ancestry. But these are the families that we've identified instead of using the word tribe. Okay.
Father?
Yep.
What were the Ukrainian that's how they started doing?
Yeah, primarily would be administered through the European American and as refugees. So there is an office of refugee services as well, specifically. And that's a growing group. And there are also people who work with, depending on whether they consider themselves affiliated with the Roman Church or the Russian Orthodox Church. And there's some real sensitivities there because originally the Ukraine was primarily Russian Orthodox and only a small part of it was Catholic. But I think things are changing. I think more and more are leaving that Russian connection on the side and saying, no, we want to affiliate with the Roman Church. So what I like to do is talk a little bit about globalization, because that's a phenomenon that we are living with and experiencing worldwide and have for many decades. And first of all, a definition of what globalization is. Globalization is the compression of time and space. The compression of time and space. We live in a globalized world, in a globalized society, where time and space aren't what they were years ago. Let me give you some examples. A few years ago, for the first time, I was flying into Colombia in South America to Bogota. And as the airplane was flying in and getting lower and lower and lower, big city, I mean, millions of people, all I saw were greenhouses, acres and acres and acres and acres of greenhouses. I thought, that's interesting. I wonder what they grow in those greenhouses. Colombia, interesting. What could be growing in these greenhouses in Colombia? But when I got there, I discovered that Colombia produces more roses, more flowers than any other country, probably in the world. So if you received roses on your birthday or Valentine's Day or an anniversary, the odds are that those roses more than likely came from either Colombia or Ecuador. Okay. Those roses are placed on an airplane, on a jet, and shipped all over the world, to Europe, to the United States, to Canada. In a matter of hours, those roses could have been in a greenhouse outside of Bogota or Medellin, and in a short period of time are the roses that the local florist has and distributes on your special occasions. That's an example of globalization. The compression of time and space. Car parts. We experience that right here in Michigan in a major way. Some parts are produced in Canada, some are produced in the United States, some are produced in Mexico, and they go up and down that highway, that expressway, and for just-in-time delivery at the assembly plants, and sometimes partially assembled in Mexico, and they're brought to US or brought to Canada and vice versa. We experience the same thing with car parts, the compression of time and space. Now, if another example, East Kentwood High School, right here in our diocese, Greater Grand Rapids, in 2017, there were 602 graduates at East Kentwood High School, representing 60 different nations. 60 different nations at East Kentwood. It's one of the most culturally diverse areas of our diocese. and nowhere is as diverse as areas of New York, Chicago, LA. I mean, those other kind of big cities. Now, if capital, meaning money, and products move seamlessly across borders, should it come as any surprise that people do as well in a globalized world? You can ship money to any country in a matter of seconds via the internet. You can talk to anybody, on Zoom or any of the different, platforms in a matter of instances. And if products and capital effortlessly move across borders and boundaries in a globalized world, people are going to as well. The bishops have a pastoral letter, "We Are Strangers No Longer," that they wrote with the Bishop Conference of Mexico. And this is just a summary of it. It's a very readable pastoral letter. You can get it on the internet, but this summary talks about the 5 principles for migration from Catholic social teaching. And the little yellow thing on the, I don't know if that's the backside, looks like it's the backside of one of the sheets, first sheet. Persons have the right to find opportunities in their homeland. Persons have the right to migrate to support themselves and their families. Sovereign nations have the right to control their borders. Refugees and asylum seekers should be afforded protection, and the human dignity and human rights of undocumented migrants should be respected. Those are the 5 principles of Catholic social teaching regarding movement and migration. But we live in a globalized world. Now, the reality is migration and the movement of people is nothing new. It's not something that's just happened. Maybe we live in a more globalized world than we ever have before, but the migration and movement of people is as old as the scriptures themselves. I like to say the movement of people, migration and the movement of people is the canvas upon which the story of salvation history is revealed and comes to life. Migration and the movement of people is the canvas upon which the story of salvation history is revealed and comes to life. I'm going to ask that you think in silence for 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe jot down if you got a piece of paper handy. What are some of the scriptural stories where migration or the movement of people was the background of that story, or had something to do with that important story, or was connected in some way to that story? Just to shout out one of those stories. Birth of Jesus. The whole Posada experience, the movement into Egypt. Interestingly enough, it parallels that whole story of Joseph from the Old Testament going down into Egypt and receiving his family there eventually, where he was welcomed and became part of the crown, and then welcomed his brothers. And if it wasn't for that, they would have died in the famine. So there's that. Egypt plays an important role, and we're going to see that. In fact, Jesus becomes the new Moses. I mean, Moses came out of Egypt, so a lot of connections to that. What other stories?
Peter and Paul going to Rome.
Peter and Paul going to Rome and spreading the gospel. The whole Acts of the Apostles is nothing but movement, outward movement, mission. All of those stories in Peter and Paul and all of their escapades. Absolutely. Paul was the greatest missionary ever known. He was, pretty amazing. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Other stories.
Would be the disciples initially leaving home and jobs and following Jesus.
Yeah. Just discipleship is about movement and migration. Yeah, they went back from different places and to back and forth to Jerusalem and to Galilee and all of that. What other stories?
I'd say contemporary, the division of Palestinians and the Jews in Jerusalem.
Well, there's the whole reality of that. Yep. Okay. Well, scripture stories. What other scripture stories are rooted in movement and migration? Okay. All the nations. Okay. All right. What are, pardon? The Exodus is the primary Old Testament story, that whole experience of Exodus. That's what formed the Jewish community and its identity. I mean, it is the story of the Old Testament that everything else seems to revolve around, that whole Exodus experience. What other ones?
Abraham and Sarah.
Abraham and Sarah. They started out in Ur, and they, which is probably modern day Iraq, and they moved towards, you know, the promised land. The whole story of the story of Abraham and Sarah, that founding those founding ancestors of ours, which all the people of the book turned to as their patriarch, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. We all find in Abraham that source of ancestry.
Kind of a weird one, uprooting and movement, Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark. All right, the whole story of Noah's Ark. It's all about movement and this flood and where they ended up and all this kind of thing. What about Adam and Eve? They got kicked out of the garden. Okay, they had to migrate. They screwed up and they ate the apple and out you go. Okay, what about the story of Ruth? The story of the foreigner who became an Israelite and ended up helping to save the Jewish people. The contribution foreigners can make. Yeah. I guarantee you, if you think about it, most every key biblical story has to do with migration and the movement of people. Okay. This isn't something that's just happening to us now or today. It goes way, way back. And it's the canvas upon which salvation history comes to life. This is a diagram that talks about the percentage of Catholics by race and ethnicity in the US according to when they were born. So the bottom one is the pre-Vatican II generation, people born before 1943. Second from the bottom is the Vatican II generation, people born between 43 and 60. The post-Vatican II generation, 61 to 81, and the millennial generation, 82 and later. The bluish, it's supposed to be blue, but it's kind of a purplish blue, is the white Caucasian. The deep red is Hispanic or Latino. The green is Black or African Americans. The purple is Asian and Pacific Islanders, and the orange is others. So, who here was born pre-Vatican II, born before 1943? Anybody? We've got a few of you. Okay, in the Catholic Church, in your generation, among your people of your generation, 76% of the Catholic Church in the United States was European American, 15% was Latino or is Latino, 4% is Black or African American. Okay. All right, who represents the Vatican II generation born between 43 and 60? Okay, in our generation, among our peers in the Catholic Church, 69% are European American, 24% Latino, 3% Black or African American. Post-Vatican II, born between 61 and 81, raise your hands. Okay, all right. In the Catholic Church in the US, 53% are European Americans, 39% Latino. Now, I can only imagine we have no one here born 82 or later, but the millennial generation in the Catholic Church in the United States, 39% is European American and 54% is Latino. Okay, so here in the Catholic Church in the United States, welcoming people is going to be key to our future as a church and as a nation. Okay, it's going to be key to us as a Catholic Church.
population has stayed relatively.
It's relatively small. We have not done well, particularly in our diocese, in my estimation, of welcoming African Americans. There are some areas where that population is growing, particularly among African refugees, many who speak French from Senegal and places like that. We have a number of African priests in our diocese, primarily from Nigeria. Most of them are Igbo tribe. But we've just not done real well with that for all sorts of reasons and historical reasons.
How important the African American Church, the Black Church, is to those.
Yeah. Although I'll be honest with you, there are very large differences between the African American and the African communities. They're sometimes they don't even get along. I mean, there can be some significant differences. But again, this gives us an idea of some percentages.
And just to localize it as well, when I had been working in the office for family and youth for the Diocese of Grand Rapids, and we had done a demographic study of the young people in our diocese, and it was 45% of everyone under the age of 30 is Latino descent of the young people in our diet. So that's right here in West Michigan. So it's pretty close to what is the national data.
My guess is 50% of the baptisms in our diocese are done in Spanish. That'd be my guess.
Oh yeah.
You know, again, larger families, more children. Yeah, that would be my guess. Now, all these kids, Latino kids, speak English and have no trouble with it, and they feel more comfortable in some things in English than ever in Spanish, but they're of Latino background. Merchants have shared parishes. This is one of the signs of the times, and those of you who are here and participate at St. Andrew's at the cathedral are what we call a shared parish. Okay. A shared parish is a parish where Mass is celebrated in more than one language on a regular Sunday. Most of my ministry, 37 out of my 38 years of ministry, have been in shared parishes. When I first got back to this country after studying in Mexico, they sent me to Holy Spirit on the west side because they wanted to make sure I could preach in English, I guess. Beyond that, it was a wonderful experience, and I had the best culinary experience of my life. I missed all that kielbasa and pierogi and kapusta. But since then, most of the parishes, all the parishes I've been in have been shared parishes where Mass is celebrated in more than one language. CARA is a think tank for the Bishops' Conference. It's a research institute. And that CARA study indicates, at the time I put the slide up, that 36% of parishes in the USA celebrate Mass in a language other than English, compared to 22% in 2010. Now, actually, I think the number now, today, is probably closer to 40% of Catholic parishes in the United States have Mass in 2 or more languages. Recently, I gave a workshop to the priests of Charlotte, North Carolina, the Diocese of Charlotte, half of the state of North Carolina. Almost every parish there has Mass in Spanish. Fastest growing Hispanic population in the country is in North Carolina as of the last census. You know, there's growth there. They're building. People are in building trades. People are moving there to work in restaurants. People are working in, painting and drywall, whatever it is. They're finding jobs there and they're settling there. These are all parishes this is an area of the country where there are very few Catholic parishes 50 years ago. And now those are some of the fastest growing dioceses in the country. The great majority of these parishes are shared by 2 or more distinct cultural ethnic communities. Here you've got 3 at the cathedral. You've got an African community, a Spanish-speaking community, and English-speaking community. In Holland, where I was pastor for many years, we had English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. I have a theory, and that is parishes with 3 cultures are more stable than 2. It becomes less polarized. It becomes less us and them. And it's like trying to sit on a chair with 2 legs. You can't, but with 3 or 4, you can. There's a parish in Maryland that outside of Washington, D.C., that has 5 distinct cultural groups. and masses in different languages on Sunday. One of the most, in Silver Springs, Maryland, one of the most dynamic parishes in the country. But they also have, I think, 3 priests. It's a Franciscan-run parish, or 4, so they have, an opportunity to, not one guy can't do it all. So the shared parish model strives to achieve a high level of ecclesial integration or inclusion among its diverse members in a spirit of unity and diversity. Unity and diversity. Unity without uniformity. We all gather around the same common table. But there's 2 things people like to do in their own language. You know what those 2 things people like to do in their own language? Pardon? Pray or sing, yep, and count your money. When you go to another country, what language do you count your money in? I bet it's in English. Okay, those are the 2 things most people like to do in their own language. Pope Francis on unity and diversity would say, so it's not always easy. It can be sometimes a little bit uncomfortable for all of us. But the Holy Spirit can work through this and does. And it's, I think, one of those aspects that really says who we are as a Catholic Church, that experience of unity and without uniformity or unity and diversity. What I'd like to do now is do a little bit of a guided meditation for maybe about 5 minutes. And there's a scripture quote from Isaiah: enlarge the space for your tent, spread out your tent cloths unsparingly, lengthen your ropes, and make firm your stakes. Now, I would invite you to just get comfortable for a few minutes. Sit however you find most comfortable. Try to relax yourself. If you find it helpful to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. But just try to let go of a little of the stress of driving here, or whatever might be on your mind, or care or concern. Let's place ourselves for a few moments in a spirit of prayerful meditation. If it helps you to close your eyes, fine. If not, that's okay. Again, from the words of the prophet Isaiah: enlarge the space for your tent, spread out your tent cloths unsparingly, lengthen your ropes, and make firm your stakes. The church is a sort of tent. So too are the privileged settings where ministry takes place within the church. Parishes, schools, hospitals, to name just a few. What does your ministry tent look like? Is it comfortable? Colorful? Spacious? Do you feel at home there? Could it be that God is calling you to enlarge, stretch out, and lengthen your tent? If so, think big. Make your tent large. Use plenty of rope. Drive the tent pegs deep. In many Catholic settings, our tents have been shrinking lately. Parishes have closed. Schools have grown smaller. Ministries discontinued or downsized. Can we see the much larger family that is before us? Could it be that God is saying something different to us today, like he did in the time of Isaiah when he painted this prophetic picture? Our church is a big tent. It requires a missionary spirit. It's no accident that the greatest missionary of all time, St. Paul, was a tent maker. Ask him to mentor you along the way in this endeavor. Pope Francis has called us to be missionary disciples. What's wonderful about life in the United States is that we don't have to travel far to be those missionary disciples. The mission field has come to us here in our own country, where we can rub shoulders with people of every race, language, and way of life. The human heart is a sort of tent. Can we spread open unsparingly the tent curtains that surround our hearts and make room for the immigrant, the stranger, the underserved populations around us? When we do, we are mutually enriched. We share and experience one another's gifts. Will we set a place at table for others within our tent? At the altar table? At the cafeteria table? At the table of learning? So many Sundays we sing, all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. Are they truly welcome in our tent? Will we say, we were expecting you? After all, the reign of God knows no limits. It is inclusive of all cultures, socioeconomic groups, and classes. Let's remember today that when it comes to enlarging our tent, that we are standing on the promises of God. We can expect great things and attempt great things. Is it time for you to enlarge your tent? You can open your eyes. Well, how can we do that? How can we enlarge that tent? How can we share that experience of welcome? How are our parishes doing that? How are our Catholic schools doing that? How are our Catholic hospitals doing that?
Habitat for Humanity.
Okay. I think Habitat for Humanity is a great example of it. I've seen what they've done and the differences they made in different neighborhoods here in the greater Grand Rapids, how people work alongside. I blessed a number of Habitat houses up along Granville Avenue. And, what a difference, what impact that has had on the lives of some of these families. Yeah.
They put it almost literally put it back in because it's given them.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of enlarging the tent.
Yeah.
So, I remember at the cathedral, and they have started conversations between the three different groups that we have represented in our parish, and just the listening, I've gone to some of the listening sessions, and I'm just so impressed that the Hispanic community has their mass, and then the African community has theirs, and the rest of us have ours, but not too much is going on as far as conversations among those groups. And just sitting down and listening to some of the struggles that the other groups are going through, the immigration struggles, the language issues, it's a wonderful thing to actually dialogue with those people, with all of us.
Yeah.
Well, at St. Paul, if possible, to begin to help the Ukrainian refugees.
Good. Good.
Amazon.com, just ordering things and have them shipped to our church, and then we do them for the Father Roman in Wyoming as he distributes them. And so the next step is sponsoring a family. So it's all new to our parish. We don't have a leader yet, but that's what they
Gathering information.
No, and I'll tell you that experience of sponsoring families can be a powerful experience and really life-giving for parishes, you know, whether it's from whatever part of the world. I know we've done that with people years ago from Vietnam, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Cuba. Yeah.
When I was in college at Michigan State, the Newman Club took on
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff. So, but it was a Spanish parish.
Sure.
And we just went,
Cristo Rey.
and I worked there for a while.
What did you?
Yes,
Brother
like,
Fred
you know,
Thalen,
police
my
cars that go around.
one of my buddies, it was pastor there for like 25 years. Thalen, Father Fred Thalen, he just retired. He was been a part of a support group for priest support group for 37 years. So,
That was a wonderful thing to do.
well, let's talk about three things that will help us grow in what we call intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is the capacity to communicate, relate, and work across cultural boundaries. And it involves developing capacity in three areas: knowledge, attitudes, and skills. Intercultural competence is going to be critical for anybody who's going into the fields nowadays of education, business, church work, almost anything. Young people are getting this more and more because they're growing up in a society like East Kentwood High School. And if we're going to be effective in the workplace or in the church, we need to grow in our intercultural competence, that ability to work, dialogue, learn from different cultures like you're describing in those groups, or work with people from other places. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And what it does is it enables us to become bridge builders rather than gatekeepers. St. Paul was an incredibly competent intercultural minister. He ministered among Jews, Greeks, male and female, slaves and free. St. Paul, as we mentioned earlier, you know, he's going to be one of our examples of what it means to minister interculturally. All three legs of the stool are important if we're going to be that bridge builder. Well, let's just briefly talk about those. The first is knowledge. That there's more than one perspective of looking at things in life. And there can be different interpretations of the same cultural reality. You know, the knowledge that we all have a culture. Some of us described ourselves as Heinz 57. The reality is all of us have a culture, and European Americans, we all have a culture. All I have to do is take you, I like to say culture is the water the fish swims in. All I got to do is take you out of your water and you'll discover you've got a culture. When I was suddenly taken out of my water and immersed in the culture of Africa, I realized, you know what? I got a culture, and this wasn't it. You know, I learned to adapt to it and all of that, but we do have a culture. So one of the first things for us to do as European Americans is to recognize we do have a culture, okay? And we have ways of doing things that are pretty predictable. And it's not the way the whole world does it. And when we're taken out of our water, we realize that. And people swim in different waters. There are different ways of looking at the same reality from a different perspective. The general dynamics of intercultural communication. You know, there's different ways of looking at life and relating in the world. There's individualistic cultures and there's sociocentric cultures. One is the family and the group is everything. The other is the individual is everything. There are different ways of looking at time in cultures. Okay, I work in a Hispanic ministry much of my priesthood. It's a different way of looking at time in Hispanic culture. It's not right or wrong, it's just different. In the scriptures, there's two ways of looking at time. There's kairos and there's chronos. Chronos is watch time, chronological time in Greek. It comes from the Greek. And yes, it's time. It's going to be time for lunch in 15 minutes, okay? And I guarantee you we will eat on time, okay? There's another time in the scriptures, it's called kairos. Now is the time to do this. Now is the day of salvation. It's a whole different way of doing it. Well, my comadre, my godmother came over to talk, so it's time to sit down and talk. Now, there may be another chronos commitment happening, but it doesn't matter. It was time to do this. This was the time. So there's different ways. One's not right or wrong, but when you're working with different groups, you need to kind of figure out how you're going to come together on that concept of time. More than one first language. If you can learn even a few words of another language, those words can be a key to helping understand a different context. Start your Ukrainian classes. Take a few words. Get somebody to teach you a few words. It does make a difference.
There's been a change, perhaps in the seminaries where language is being required as part of.
Some seminaries do require a second language. Some parts of the country, they require Spanish. They require an ability to at least say the Mass and hear confessions in Spanish. Some seminaries will say sign language could be a second language. Some seminaries will, here in our diocese, they encourage it. It's not required. We do have a number of seminarians who are pretty proficient in Spanish. We need more. I'll be honest with you. We need more because it's just more and more. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know in Ada, they've got this incredible Chinese program, and, the kids are learning Chinese from an early age. That's the way to learn it. The other thing would be skills. This ability to empathize, to feel with others. That's an important skill, to feel with that pregnant mother and father on that journey, knocking on the door. Can we empathize with them? Those of you who are pregnant know what it was like. Can you imagine going on a journey in the midst of your pregnancy and not knowing where you're going to be staying? And then when you're born in a feeding trough. You're born in a manger, a feeding trough. Well, Jesus is the bread of life. He is that bread that came down from heaven. It all makes sense when we look at it, but I can only imagine what Mary and Joseph must have been like. Joseph probably is inadequate as hell. Men like to be in control and have the situation. I can only imagine poor Joseph, But Mary, to be able to, I've ridden on a donkey, and believe me, even in the best of condition, it ain't fun. Riding on a donkey when you're pregnant? I mean, that whole ability to listen and to listen to the words and the body language of people. If you don't speak their language, try to maybe pay attention to their body language. Sometimes that tells stories. Gestures are powerful. Pope Francis has got this down like nobody I know. If you ever seen him on the piazza in Rome when he's doing his audience, how he kisses the babies and hugs the sick, and his gestures speak so much of the love he has for people. Powerful. I mean, working with Vietnamese, I didn't know a lot of Vietnamese. But, I learned enough to be able to, welcome somebody and bow and take them. We had if you ever get to Holland, see the Church of St. Francis de Sales. It burnt down while I was pastor there 25 years ago. You know that well. And on the actual Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, they were tuck pointing the brick on the outside, melting some ice outside on the wall of the church. They didn't realize there was wood in the wall and it caught fire. And it was almost a total loss. So we designed a church for a culturally diverse shared parish for English, Spanish, and Vietnamese speakers. It's in the altar is round. We have radius pews that gather around the table of the Lord. Carved into the altar are the fruits, flowers, and plants of importance to all the different communities. You've got tulips, we had the shamrock, we had corn and grain and wheat and grapes, we had the prickly pear, we had the trillium, we had all the different tuberose for the Vietnamese, where, you know, unity without uniformity. There's a shrine for the Vietnamese martyrs. There's an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. There's a light image of St. Francis de Sales, you know, where we could all come together. We salvaged 10,000 bricks from the church that burnt, and in a tent in the winter, European American, English speaking, Spanish speaking, Vietnamese speakers chipped the mortar off of those bricks so we could incorporate them into the walls, because part of the walls were still of value, and we used them in the reconstruction. You know, coming together, that unity without uniformity, working together to build the churches, powerful symbols. Ability to tolerate ambiguity. I don't know, I don't understand. I need to go deeper. There are things you're not going to understand, whether it's with the Hispanic community or other groups. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It means we got to go deeper. We got to give deeper understanding. The ability to adapt communication and behavior. Sometimes we have to adapt our behavior in the way we communicate. Some cultures are very direct. You just say it like it is. We need more money in this church. Some cultures, you got to talk in circles and be indirect, and you're going to be far more effective in getting more money than saying we need more money. Just cultural ways of doing things. Yep.
I will give them communion, but I will touch the babies and make it so it's a prayer. May God keep you all the babies of the world.
Okay. Believe me, people in Latino traditions will love that, because blessings are something parents provide and grandparents provide for babies. It's not reserved to a priest or a deacon. And it's important to touch the child, because in many Latino customs, if you see a baby there and you talk about that baby and say something, but don't touch it, and that baby gets sick, that you gave the baby the evil eye, and you are blamed for it. So one of the first things I learned in Latino ministry in Mexico was when I went into somebody's little hut in the middle of nowhere, is I saw a baby, was to make sure you touch that baby and not just look at that baby. These are traditional beliefs, you know, but they take them very seriously sometimes. Now, not everybody in a sophisticated, educated way will think those things, but some people do. So let's finally talk about attitudes. And for me, maybe these are the most important of all. Knowledge and skills is important, but probably attitudes. And openness to others and other cultures. Just the spirit of openness, to be a good listener. I think of all the people I've known in my the diocese over the years, Bishop Rose always stood out as being an amazing listener. He had a capacity. When you were with him, you knew you had his full attention. He totally listened. If you gave him something to look at and then at a meeting, he had it read and processed, and, you know, amazing ability to tune into the other. There's openness, waiting to learn and engage, wanting to learn and engage other cultures. Curiosity. Curiosity is one of those gifts that can really help us in this area. One of those attitudes. I wonder why they do it this way. There's a logic to it. Why do Mexicans eat chili peppers? Why do they like hot, spicy food? Well, you look at the diet, the pre-Columbian diet, it was corn, beans, squash. There was no vitamin A or C. It came from the chili. That's what allowed them to continue life as a race. They just knew that if you ate this stuff, you stayed healthy. If you didn't, you died. You know, there's a logic to it all. The understanding intercultural interactions is a way of life, not a problem to be solved. This isn't problematic. It's a way of life. There's a whole spirituality to this. There's a whole depth, a whole richness to this. And then the whole experience of mindfulness. If I don't understand, but well, we'll leave it at that. We're getting close to So what I'd like us to do for a few minutes is some table talk. We got about 8 minutes until 1:45, right? So what intercultural competencies, knowledge, attitudes, and skills are you utilizing or have seen others utilize? How are we doing at welcoming the stranger as a church or as individuals? What can we do to welcome Christ born in our midst this Advent or Christmas? All right, we're going to wind down here. I know you got more to share, and hopefully you can do that over lunch. But I would just like to close by inviting us to reflect on who that person or persons who might be knocking on our doors this Advent or Christmas season. This young woman a couple of years ago knocked on our door. She was an immigrant, pregnant, and you know, sometimes we think what they're looking for is some sort of help. You know, we got to give them something like food or clothing or whatever. Sometimes, and in this case, she just wanted somebody to listen, somebody to talk to. She wanted to be a part of a bigger family. She left her family behind. She wanted to get to know other people. She wanted to learn a little bit of English. You know, if people are going to get any type of job, they got to have some English skills. So it's those sorts of things that we can provide, and not just the physical things. I'm not saying we don't do that, food and drink and shelter. It's all important. But I think sometimes we overlook what is deeply important, and that is sharing the love of God with people by listening. But, you know, those are the kind of things that people are looking for and can make a real impact on their life. So thank you very much. It's been a blessing. I admire all of what you shared and are doing, and keep it up. It's great to see a group like this. Thank you.